So thank you for being faithful this afternoon on a July 3rd afternoon before we begin a little bit of a holiday break for coming out to this afternoon speaker session with Brent. So appreciate you being here. Brent, I know several of these and our future looks bright.
Great.
So it's good to have you young leaders and professionals here. Thank you for taking time off this afternoon to join us. Let me introduce you to our guest today. Brent McBurney is the president and CEO of Advocates International. Has served in that capacity since January of 2011. And he's traveled extensively during that time. Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, the Middle East, North and South America, and just mentioned he'll be in Africa here soon in just a few weeks, yeah. I think, again. In all of that travel, what he does and others through Advocates International is he seeks to inspire and mobilize advocates to bear witness of Jesus Christ in relationship to the law. Prior to joining Advocates International, Brent served the Christian Legal Society as Director of Legal Aid Ministries, Director of Attorney Ministries, and Editor-in-Chief of the Christian Lawyer magazine. A very accomplished lawyer. Served at Christian Legal Society from 2004 to 2011. He served for a number of years as a trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, was a law clerk to the Honorable Robert H. Hodges, Jr. on the United States Court of Federal Claims. He's a well-trained in education, graduated from Baylor University with a degree in Russian language and political science. Baylor's a friend of the RFI, as you know, and so we welcome him today. His law degree is from the George Mason University School of Law in Northern Virginia. The office of Advocates International is in Alexandria, so they're a neighbor. Brent has been a friend of religious freedom as long as I've known him, and probably all of your adult life, and works locally here in Washington and around the globe. Advocates International is an organization that enables advocates to connect locally and cooperate nationally and globally to promote justice, rule of law, religious freedom, reconciliation, and integrity. Areas of advocacy that they work in: family and community, religious freedom, justice for the poor, rule of law, peace and reconciliation, and sanctity of human life. A number of areas that Brent and I have collaborated on in one fashion or another. Brent was very active in helping secure the passage of H.R. 1150, the amendment to the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act, which passed in December of 2016. He works aggressively on immigration and asylum law issues. We collaborated some on an Iranian crisis, refugees, about 2 years ago. And then Brent's been a great partner in H.R. 1150, which passed just this last December, the Iraq Genocide and Relief and Accountability Act. So we're glad to have you today, Brent. We consider you a friend, and we're privileged really to have him here this afternoon. So come and share with us. Blessed are the lawyers. It's not often I get to say that. We're usually the brunt of jokes, exactly. Are we not? But today, blessed are the lawyers. Here's Brent McBurney.
Thanks, David. Before I start, I want to get an idea of my audience. Are any of you lawyers? Are any of you thinking about going to law school, or you're in law school now? Okay, a few of you, okay. May it please the court, I represent the United States of America. Now, when I was a trial attorney at the Department of Justice, those 12 words were the opening for every day in court. And it's pretty cool to be able to represent 300 million people as your client. But I had a mentor, one of my mentors in the law said, really, we should truly only have one client, and that's God. We should serve God, and He should be our client. Everything we do in the law as a lawyer should be in service to God. And so this afternoon, I'd like to share 3 things. First, I'm going to tell you briefly about Advocates International and what we do. Second, because we're here at RFI, I want to share the importance that lawyers play in today's battles for religious liberty. And finally, I'll introduce you to a few heroes of the faith who happen to be lawyers. Now, the mentor I told you about who said he has one client, and that's God, was a Harvard lawyer named Sam Erickson. And in December of 1990, shortly after the Soviet Union dissolved, he was invited to speak at the Soviet Academy of Sciences, of all places, not the Bar Association, but the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Very interesting. So while at the time, he was the director of the Christian Legal Society. If any of you have heard of the Christian Legal Society, or CLS, it's the ministry here in the United States for Christian attorneys. And he was the executive director of the Christian Legal Society. Well, the Christian Legal Society seeks to fulfill the mission of God's command found in Micah 6:8, which says, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?" So during his visit to Moscow, Sam met a lawyer named Natalia Vysotskaya. Now, he described Natalia as a combination of Margaret Thatcher and Mother Teresa. And you guys are probably too young to remember what do you remember Margaret Thatcher's nickname? The Iron Lady. So Natalia was an iron lady with a heart of compassion. That's how Sam described her. She had a legal aid clinic called Vera Nadezhdu Lyubov, Faith, Hope, and Love. And she would provide free legal aid for prisoners across Russia, and using volunteer lawyers. And a couple of her lawyers were actually retired justices of the Soviet Supreme Court. Fascinating woman. I actually got a chance to work with her. But Sam realized that God was calling him to leave CLS, to leave America, and help lawyers like Natalia in other countries. And so in 1991, he founded Advocates International. And at that time, there were about 12 Christian lawyer fellowships around the world. So for 20 years, until he passed in 2011, Sam traveled the world meeting with lawyers and judges in countries. And today, the Advocates is a movement of over 30,000 lawyers, judges, law students in 130 different countries. And as David mentioned, our 6 areas of primary focus: religious freedom, human rights and justice for the poor, peace and reconciliation, sanctity of life at all stages, integrity under the rule of law, and protecting the family. Now, how do we do this? Jesus tells us in Acts 1:8, "You shall be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and even to the ends of the earth." So we use an acronym, LORD. Helps you to remember things. And you may have used acronyms to help you get through exams and things like that. And our founder loved acronyms. So this was the acronym he used, LORD. L is for local meetings. So if you're here in Washington, D.C., you meet locally with other legal professionals in your location. That's your Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where you live. And then O is organize nationally. And so the Christian Legal Society here in the United States is the national group of local Christian lawyer groups, chapters that meet across the country. And that's Judea. Judea is the nation that Jerusalem is the capital of. R stands for regional cooperation. And each of those nations come together on all 6 continents and form advocates groups. So at the end of August, I'll be going to Kenya for the 13th Advocates Africa Convocation. And there are 37 countries in Africa which have Christian lawyer fellowships of varying sizes. From the smallest in the world that I'm aware of, 3 Christian lawyers in Libya, all the way up to the largest, which is in Nigeria. There are over 3,000 members of the Christian Lawyers Fellowship of Nigeria. And so that's the regional cooperation. That's Samaria. Samaria is in the region of your nation. And then the D is disciple globally, and that's to the ends of the earth, right? And so that's what we do. And there are two key ways we carry out our mission and our vision. Our vision is to see all people thriving in hope, peace, and justice within societies committed to religious freedom and the rule of law. And our mission is to inspire and mobilize Christian advocates globally to bear witness of Jesus Christ in the law. So the way we carry out our mission and vision, two ways: innkeepers and builders of guardrails. So how many of you are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan? Great. Well, how many of you know what prompted the Good Samaritans? Who prompted the Good Samaritan? Who asked that question? It was a lawyer. So let me just briefly read it from Luke 10, 25 to 37. And a lawyer stood up and put Jesus to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How does it read to you?" And, which is a good teacher will always do that, right? Ask a question, answer a question with a question. And if you go to law school, you'll get used to that. And the lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But wishing to justify himself, the lawyer said to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor?" So Jesus replied and said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance a priest was going down on the road. He saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite also, and he came and he walked on the other side. But a Samaritan," and as you know, the Samaritans, the Jews did not like Samaritans. A Samaritan was on a journey, came upon him. When he saw him, he felt compassion, came to him, bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them, put him on his own beast, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii, which is like 2 days' salary, gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I'll repay you." So Jesus said, "Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands?" And the lawyer said, "The one who showed mercy to him." And Jesus said, "Go and do the same." So I'd like to bring your attention to one character in that story that's often, if not always, overlooked. The innkeeper. Nobody ever talks about the innkeeper. But at Advocates International, we talk about the innkeeper. Now, the Samaritan man didn't take the beaten man on his donkey with him on his business trip. Basically, he was on a business trip. He went to the local Holiday Inn. No, he went to the innkeeper. He had a relationship with that innkeeper. You can read between the lines that he knew the innkeeper, because the innkeeper didn't just immediately, like if he showed up at a Holiday Inn, they'd say, "Go to the hospital, take this guy to the hospital. We don't want bloody people in the lobby of our hotel," right? But back in that day, you had a relationship. And he said, "When I come back, I'll pay you whatever additional expense you may have for taking care of this guy." So there's a relationship with the innkeeper. And so we use this Good Samaritan principle to encourage lawyers in their countries to be innkeepers of the problems that they're facing. So I'm admitted to practice here in the District of Columbia and in the state of New York. Now, I live in Virginia. If I have a legal problem in Virginia, I have to call one of my classmates who's admitted in Virginia and say, Mike or Rob or Gus, "Hey, can you help me in court, because I'm not admitted to practice in Virginia." And so the same is true globally. Now, as an expert in religious freedom, I can help my colleagues in other countries when religious freedom issues come up. And I can share with them how we got passage of 1150 or other areas of religious freedom in the United States. But they, as the innkeeper, as the lawyer admitted to practice in their country, have to be the ones to take whatever I bring to them, whatever expertise I bring to them, they have to take it and put it into their context. They are the innkeeper of that. And so that's how we help these lawyers. We treat them as innkeepers. But like the Samaritan, he says, hey, I'll pay you when I come back. So we actually provide financial support for some of these lawyers who are doing some of the work in their cases. The other key way that advocates encourages our colleagues to be engaged is by building guardrails. And I don't know if you've ever heard the guardrail story. Okay, picture a cliff. At the top of the cliff, there's chaos. And people are being pushed off the cliff by the owners of the cliff. And there's 3 responses that you can have to that. The first is humanitarian, and that's to help the people at the bottom of the cliff. And you help the people who have been injured, but that response, there's more is needed than just simply helping the people who've been pushed off the cliff. The second response is to report the evil at the top of the cliff. And that's usually the job of the press. And that's to go and tell the world, hey, the owners of this cliff are bad people. Well, when that happens, they usually get a stiff arm because the owners of the cliff don't want to be exposed for pushing their own people off the cliff. And you see that all the time in countries where there's chaos. Venezuela right now is probably the best example. And they don't like it when the media show up and show what's really going on in a place like that. So the third response, and this is the response that we encourage our advocates to take, and that's to prevent abuses by building guardrails. So you go to the owner of the cliff, you develop relationships with parliamentarians, with the executive, whatever in your country, and say, how can we help you build a guardrail, i.e. good laws or better laws, to keep people from getting pushed off the cliff, so A, people aren't getting pushed off the cliff, and B, you don't look so bad because you're pushing people off the cliff. And so that's the idea of building guardrails. And so we work with our advocates to be innkeepers and to build guardrails. So we greatly appreciate the work that RFI does. Thank you. And for those of you interning here, just fantastic work. I was with Tim last summer in Bangkok. There was a conference there that RFI was one of the co-sponsors of, and I was there for a different conference, but on one day we took the law students from our conference over to the other conference, just so that those law students could have an opportunity to mingle with some of these religious freedom advocates from all across Southeast Asia. And the students just were blown away. They were like amazed. The Vietnamese delegation that were there, they were worried, they were literally worried themselves that they were going to be, and some of them had been at previous conferences, arrested when they returned home from the previous conferences because they're speaking out against what the Vietnamese government is doing. And so the students that were at our conference had an amazing time getting to meet some of these religious freedom advocates from all across Southeast Asia. So I appreciate the work that RFI does, and we're always pleased to collaborate with partners like that. But I don't know how many of you are aware that according to the Pew Research Institute, about 80%, 4 out of 5 people living on the planet today, live in countries in which their religious freedom is highly or very highly restricted. That's 4 out of 5 people living have highly or very highly restricted religious freedom. And it happens primarily in 2 ways. First, governmental or legal restrictions. And this includes 55 different countries have high, and the examples are, probably the most prominent examples would be Albania and North Korea. And if you know anything about the history of Albania, it was literally the world's only officially atheistic nation. Many people think that's North Korea, but in North Korea they actually worship the Kims. But The law in Albania, as it is in North Korea, and Albania was from the 60s through 1991, when Enver Hoxha died, their dictator. And in North Korea, if you are found in your possession, a Bible, a Quran, or any other kind of religious book or icon, or a rosary, anything like that, in Albania it was an automatic 25-year prison sentence. Just for possessing, let alone reading the Bible. If you had one in your house, you could be thrown in prison, 25-year sentence. And the same in North Korea. And that's pretty high restriction on your religious freedom, wouldn't you say? So that's the religious freedom. The second way that these restrictions happen is societal hostilities, social hostilities, because the laws are not enforced. There may be good laws or even bad laws on the books. But when those laws aren't enforced, then people can say, oh, well, since they're not enforcing them, we should be the ones enforcing those. And Tim Shaw would be the first one to tell you that India is probably one of the prime examples of that problem. There are a number of states within India that have anti-conversion laws. And those laws require that if you were going to convert from, and the law simply says religion A to religion B, but in practice it really means if you're going to convert from Hinduism to Christianity or Islam or any other religion, you must notify the local authorities in the city you live in 30 or 60 days before you do so. Now, that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, how can you really enforce that? You can't. But what it does is it gives the local Hindu shaman and the political wing of the BJP or whatever to say, well, the local city is not enforcing this, so we will enforce it. So they go out with impunity and force convert Muslims and Christians and other minority faiths back to Hinduism. And the same law actually says, several of the same laws in those states say, but it's okay if you convert from religion B or C back to religion A. And so that's where the social hostilities come in. And that includes 54 countries. And the best example, another example of the growing social hostilities, is happening here in the West. And that is, it's increasingly found in the courts. We're seeing an increasing tension between religious beliefs and secular ideals. The battle for minds is often focused on sexual freedom and morality. And how many of you were here for the first speaker series, the first speaker of this series? She spoke on soccer. And yeah, so you all heard Jennifer Bryson talk about the tensions between the politicization of LGBT, within sports. And, teams are, putting rainbow colors on their jerseys and making, even though, as she mentioned in her talk, the rules don't allow that. Well, they've simply changed the rules, haven't they? I mean, the one thing that stood out to me in her entire talk was, for 2020, the rules are changing to add equality to, what can be used on, which is an interesting way of, and so that same thing, over the past 20 years, we've seen LGBT activists pushing for same-sex marriage via the courts because they're unsuccessful at the ballot box. So they turn to the court, they turn to lawyers. So within 2 decades, we've gone from most states banning same-sex marriage under the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996, which was signed into law by President Clinton, all the way up to 2015. So within a 20-year period, with the Supreme Court's Obergefell v. Hodges decision, which basically said same-sex marriage is now constitutional all across America. And it went very quickly from, through the courts. And so the lawyers are facing those battles. But we're continuing to see that it's not just, they don't want just same-sex marriage. They're now pushing through the courts for not just acceptance, but not just tolerance, but beyond. It's beyond that. And so you've seen some of the cases, the Masterpiece Cake Shop, and some of these bakers who don't want to have to be forced to make a wedding cake for a same-sex marriage, or florists and photographers, and those are some of the challenges, and some of these people. So there's the right of conscience there that that is being violated, and some states are even pushing this. Washington State, with the case of Baronelle Stutzman, the florist, and her case. The Supreme Court just sent her case back to Washington State. So it's and there are similar challenges happening across Europe and in Canada, and they're spreading across the globe, but often with the use of lawyers and lawsuits. And so that's the importance of lawyers, because you need to build guardrails, and you can rewrite constitutions, or you have to have legal expertise to deal with some of these issues. So sometimes the only response is to file a lawsuit to overturn bad laws. Oftentimes it's defending against lawsuits. Well, let me tell you about 3 heroes of the faith who happen to be lawyers. First, I want to recommend a new book to you written by a friend of mine, and this will be on sale in October. So I can I'll send the links to David and Catherine, and they can send the links if you're interested in pre-ordering this on Amazon. It's Free to Believe: The Battle Over Religious Liberty in America. And Luke Goodrich is a good friend of mine. Used to go to my church here on Capitol Hill. Works for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. And he was actually the lawyer who represented Hobby Lobby, and he represented the Little Sisters of the Poor, if you remember that case, where the Obama administration's regulations were requiring that these Little Sisters of the Poor, who were basically Catholic nuns helping elderly people, were being forced to either pay huge, enormous fines or provide abortifacient contraceptives for their nuns through their employee health program. Luke also represented a Muslim inmate who was seeking to grow a beard, and the prison was saying, no, you can't do that, and he actually won that case in the Supreme Court. This book is amazing. I highly recommend, if you have any interest at all in what's going on, that you read this. But I'm just going to read just a brief excerpt from his book. What now? It says, our culture has changed. For the first time in American history, widespread Christian beliefs are viewed as a threat to the dominant culture. The belief in absolute truth is now viewed as a form of discrimination. The belief that abortion is wrong is now viewed as an assault on the health and dignity of women. The belief that God designed sex for marriage between a man and a woman is now viewed as an attack on the LGBT community. Our nation is less religious than ever before, meaning fewer people need religious freedom. And our nation is more religiously diverse than ever before, meaning it is harder to protect religious freedom than ever before. This is a recipe for unprecedented attacks on religious freedom. And he gives just an amazing explanation of the battles that are going on in religious freedom, and the challenges, and the reason that we need to stand up for everybody, including Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, you name it. And if any of you are interested, there's an International Religious Freedom Roundtable that meets fairly regularly now, that Ambassador Sam Brownback has taken over the office of the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom. And it's an amazing mix of people who come together. And I like to say it's a non-group group. And there's everyone from the atheist to the Zoroastrians, and everyone in between. Probably no one in that room can agree very easily with anybody else on theological issues. But we all agree on one thing, and that's that everyone deserves religious freedom. Everyone deserves to have that right for religious freedom. And Luke's book addresses that and does a very good job of it. So I encourage you to get that. The second hero is fighting similar religious liberty battle in the UK. It's a lawyer named Andrea Williams, and her group is called Christian Concern. So Andrea and her legal team just won a huge victory for Christian freedoms and freedom of speech in the UK. Their client Felix Ngole was expelled from his social work course at University of Sheffield after quoting Bible verses on Facebook that were judged to be critical of homosexuality. He had entered into a Facebook discussion, never do that, regarding the imprisonment of Kim Davies. Do you remember Kim Davies? Kentucky marriage registrar who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Well, Felix was reported anonymously several months later to the university and disciplined in a fitness to practice hearing where he was informed that he had brought the social work profession into disrepute and was then expelled from the course after he had only one semester to go to graduate and become a social worker. During the course of the hearing, the university told him that the expression of his Christian views was unacceptable and that to remain in the program he must either renounce his faith or stay silent. Well, literally yesterday, the Court of Appeal in the UK ruled that the mere expression of views on theological grounds, e.g. that homosexuality is a sin, does not necessarily connote that the person expressing such views will discriminate on such grounds. The decision further recognized that Felix had never been shown to act in a discriminatory fashion. So such decisions have significant implications not only for Christian freedom of speech, but in relation to all free speech in the UK. Comments made by people on social media, often many years ago, have recently been arbitrarily used to silence viewpoints that people dislike or disagree with. How many sports figures have you seen that tweeted something stupid in high school are now being called out for having said something when they were young and inexperienced? By show of hands, how many of you have probably tweeted something that you wish you hadn't tweeted? Yeah, I won't make you raise your hands, but now had it not been for Andrea and the team of lawyers, Felix probably never would have gained an opportunity to return to his profession. I mean, he studied for 4 years, had a semester left, and got kicked out of the school simply for joining a Facebook and simply quoting scripture on a Facebook, which is in his private capacity, right? So despite the victory at the Court of Appeal, he now has to go back to the university and to a panel who will judge, in light of the court's decision, whether his fitness to practice as a social worker. So his battle's not over. He may have won, he may have won at the court, but it's still going. And as we've seen in other cases like Masterpiece Cake Shop, Jack Phillips has subsequently been sued again. He was sued again, and which the Colorado took away the case, and then he's been sued a third time after winning at the Supreme Court. So it's not over. So finally, I'd like to conclude by telling you about Buddha. Not that guy who started a religion, but a Christian lawyer and pastor from Nepal. So Buddha is one of a team of lawyers who've been fighting to overturn the 2018 anti-conversion law in Nepal that essentially criminalizes Christianity. Late last year, they filed a writ petition at the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court of Nepal to rule that the new law is unconstitutional. Well, for the past 6 months, the court registrar decided he didn't like the case, so he wasn't allowing the case to move forward to the court to be heard by the judges. So they have had perseverance in that, and they had to file a special motion with the court asking the court to require the registrar to allow the case to move forward, which is, kind of crazy. Thankfully, just last week they received the ruling from the court telling the registrar, you have to let us hear this case. And so this Friday, there actually will be the first of, I'm sure, many hearings on the constitutionality of this anti-conversion law in Nepal. And who knows how long that battle will be, but Advocates International stands alongside lawyers like Buddha and others, who's an innkeeper in Nepal. We continue to encourage lawyers like Andrea Williams and her team in the UK, and lawyers like Luke Goodrich here with the Beckett Fund. We'll continue to encourage the growth of Christian legal fellowships in countries around the globe. So 130 countries have Christian lawyer fellowships. We'd love to see 198 countries. We'd love to see every country in the world have one. I'm not sure how likely that is, but that's one of the things we're hoping to do. And we want to encourage them to take on those challenges of religious freedom, human rights and justice for the poor, peace and reconciliation, sanctity of life at all stages, integrity under the rule of law, and protecting the family. So for these reasons, we rest on the arguments made today in court and those provided in our brief. Thanks.
If anyone has any questions, we'll just pass around the mic. You're not going to hear any sound from the speakers, but it's just for the audio recording. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just appreciated touching on the international and domestic sphere. My question's more for the domestic concerns you talked about and how our culture is walking away from absolute truth and how that changes the dynamics of religious freedom. So I guess strategically, what do you see as a good legal strategy or argument that lawyers can be making for religious freedom in light of the struggles of the change of beliefs and culture?
Well, as Winston Churchill said, never, 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 never give up, right? It's going to be a long and protracted war. It is a war. As Scripture says, we're not fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities and powers in the heavenly realms. So that's part of the battle. Get Luke's book. These challenges are downstream of culture. Hollywood has done a fantastic job of changing the minds of people everywhere as to what's normal. They have normalized that which wasn't considered normal a generation ago. I read somewhere that, statistically, there's maybe 4 to 5% of the population are homosexual, or will admit that they're homosexual. But the perception, there have been surveys that have been done when you ask people's perception based on what they see in movies and TV and everything. How many people do you think are gay in America? You want to take a guess, anybody? 25%. That's the perception. 5 times what the reality is because of the culture. And people are, they're trying to normalize that which for 2,000, 6,000, however many years history has been going, has not been considered normal behavior. And so that's half the battle. And they're going across, they're going to other countries, and most of the rest of the world don't want abortion laws, liberal abortion laws, or same-sex marriage laws. And yet too often that's what, especially from Europe, and money that comes from Europe to a lot of countries. And under the previous administration, the State Department was focusing its foreign aid on the acceptance of abortion and same-sex marriage. And so those are the challenges that they face in other countries. In Latin America, predominantly Catholic, very anti-abortion, very pro-life. They are very pro-life in Latin America. And yet they are seeing a push from America and Europe to change those laws and allow for more liberal abortion laws. And it's the same with, more so in Africa with the same-sex marriage issue, but also with abortion. In Africa, they're very conservative. South Africa is the only country on the African continent that allows both abortion and same-sex marriage. And so the rest of the countries in Africa are like, no, thank you, that's not what we want. So those are some of the challenges. We're seeing it in Asia now. Taiwan just passed same-sex marriage. Abortion happens in Korea, but it's not very widely accepted. And the same with same-sex marriage. The laws they come in with the addition on discrimination laws of adding gender identity, sexual orientation and gender identity to discrimination, because no one wants to discriminate, and we shouldn't discriminate. There's, people do what they do, they shouldn't be discriminated against. But when you make the law require that without exceptions for freedom of conscience, then you start to run into problems that we're seeing with the various bakers and florists and others who, for religious conscience reasons, don't agree with that, or don't want to be forced to celebrate a same-sex union or something like that. Now, how many of you remember your American history and what the Quakers went through? You remember that? The Quakers had a pretty hard time of it before, through the 1600s, through the Revolution, but they're pacifists, they're conscientious objectors, they will not fight in wars. And no matter how much they were persecuted and put in prison, they stuck to their guns, pun intended, for not fighting in wars and not taking up weapons. And eventually, the laws were changed to allow for conscientious objection. And so that's one of the arguments that Luke makes in his book here, is that the same needs to be allowed, for these battles of abortion or same-sex marriage. We have to allow conscientious objection for those whose religious beliefs do not allow them, like pharmacists, who are required to, prescribe morning after abortion pills when they're Catholic, and that's something that goes against their conscience. And one of his clients lost their case in Oregon. The pharmacists lost their case there and had to close down their business, a 4-generation family business, pharmacy. And within a 5-mile radius, there were 35 other pharmacies that prescribed those pills. And yet they were targeted and forced to close down. So there's a balance there somewhere, right? Between conscientious objection and it wasn't that people who wanted those pills couldn't get them, but because of the state laws and the state going after them, they ended up having to close their business. So I don't know if that's it's a tough challenge. There are tough challenges, and of course the other challenge is law school. Some of you raised your hands and said you think you're going to go to law school. Well, when I meet students, young people who are interested in law school, I say, don't do it, run screaming from the room. But law is not for everybody, but it's a fun profession because you can do a lot of things with a law degree. You learn a lot, and it's a way of thinking. And but it's there are challenges in the law, and in law school they'll teach you this much. And there's this much law out there. In law school, they teach you this much. When you get into practice, it'll be about this much, whatever it is you do. And it may not even be anything you learned in law school. But these kinds of issues that we're facing on these battles, there aren't that many jobs out there that are addressing these issues. So that's another challenge. A lot of students go to law school. A lot of people say, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to be a religious freedom advocate. And well, fantastic if you can get the job, but there's so few jobs out there in that field. You got to be prepared to do other things. So did that answer your question? Did it help answer your question? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Junie Joseph, and I just have a question for you. I've never heard of the conscious objection. And by the way, I'm a second-year law student.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm a Christian as well, but to me, there is a tension between my Christian faith and just to be a little bit transparent here, although for myself, I wouldn't agree to abortion, but I think abortion rights is very important for women. So I wanted to hear more from you about that. And also, another thing that I think about, because you talked about freedom of expression for religious people, but I wonder, how about the rights as well of gay people and also women to choose for themselves? So there is that as well. You know what I mean? Because when we, as Christians, we want to be able to express ourselves freely, but at the same time, we don't want to violate other people's rights as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think what we're seeing today is, and yes, you know, there were people who, you know, a lot of gays were and still are treated very poorly in a lot of communities. They're discriminated against, and that's absolutely wrong. You know, they shouldn't be. But what we're seeing is that the pendulum has swung, but it's not going back. They're pushing forward to such a point that, as you know, as Luke said in his book, it's like we've gotten to a point now where our beliefs are considered discriminatory, and you know what has been the case for 2,000 years, 6,000 years, is now considered bigotry to say that a marriage should be between a man and a woman. And so instead of, you know, there's tolerance as long as you tolerate what we think. But if you don't tolerate what we think, then we're coming after you. And so there's a balance there. There's got to be a balance there somewhere on those issues. And you know, the idea of having that balance is where these battles are being fought right now. You know, when it comes to abortion, you know, that's not one of my primary areas of expertise, but all I can say is that it's the taking of a life. And to allow laws, you know, and my take is to allow laws that allow an underage minor to get an abortion without her parents' permission, when she can't even get an aspirin or an Advil from her school without her parents' permission, there's something wrong with that. And that women are not being given the opportunity to see the baby that's inside of them before they make that choice, I think is very sad. And you know, and that's where you kind of get into this, you know, what's you know, where do your freedoms and where do your responsibilities come into play? And you know, I feel that, you know, when you encourage people, you know, society says, well, heck, you know, if you get pregnant, you can just have an abortion. Well, I think we're basically telling people you're nothing more than an animal, and you have nothing more. You don't have enough respect for yourself to do things for yourself to keep from getting pregnant. Now, I'm not saying that women don't get raped. Yes, I mean those things happen. And if people want to go and just be an animal and go and have sex, well, they're going to do that. But I think we're selling people short on what they really could be. And in terms of respecting themselves and not just allowing abortion to be their birth control. So that's, you know, that's why I'm pro-life. And you know, the press always talks about anti-abortion. No, it's pro-life. It's pro-choice and pro-life. but you can't have it both ways. And they want to say pro-choice and anti-abortion. No. If they were truly neutral reporters and writing real stories, they would say pro-life and pro-choice, or pro-abortion and anti-abortion. But so there's my response to that. There's a chapter in here on the abortion issues as well, and there are other resources out there that can help with that. One of the partners that Advocates works with is a group called World Without Orphans, and that's it's also CAFO is another group, and that's groups that are working with foster kids and orphans, and it's it's the body of Christ really trying to help unwanted babies, and finding homes for them, and that's often the argument. Well, you only care about your pro-life arguments, so that you can get people to vote for you. Well, in reality, people are working hard behind the scenes in pregnancy care centers, helping women to through their pregnancies, through the birth, after they've had the child, helping them to find adoptive parents if that's what their decision needs to be. So there are a lot of efforts that are going into that. So we're not losing people. Right now there's a demographic crisis in India and China because of the one-child policy that China has had for a generation since 1976, I believe. They have, I think, and I don't know, David, if you can, if anybody knows this, is something like within this current generation of men to women in China is like 65% men and 35% women. Because in China, if you're going to have a baby, you want a son. And if it's a girl, you get an abortion. Or you just let the baby die. Well, so they are missing an entire generation of women, a gendercide. They're calling it gendercide. You've probably heard that term, where people are sex selecting their abortions. I don't want a daughter, so I will abort. Well, you know what that leads to? Is sex trafficking. Because you have 65% of a generation of men in China, 35% women, so that's at least half the men who can't find wives. So where do they get them? They get them from Thailand and Indonesia and Bangladesh and India, other places. They get trafficked as young women to be wives for all this generation of Chinese men that don't have husbands. Same issues going on in India. One of the most dangerous words, in India is, it's a girl. Because that likely means she'll be aborted or left to die. And so they're facing similar issues in India with that. And so it's not just the babies that were killed through the abortion. And since in the last century, over 100 million babies have been aborted worldwide. 100 million. But it also leads to other problems like sex trafficking and other issues. So those are just some of the problems surrounding abortion, especially in countries like China, India, and places like that. So that's why I'm pro-life. You're killing children, you're killing babies. I was shocked. I was shocked when Justice Ginsburg said that a pregnant mother who wants to have an abortion is not a mother. I've met Justice Ginsburg. She's a wonderful lady. I've been in meetings with her, with judges that we've brought from other countries. She's a wonderful lady. But when she says something like that, wow, I'm sorry, that just shocked me when she said that. And it's twisting words. I mean, when you're not expecting to be a mother, you are a mother. When you become pregnant, you are a mother. So that's. Any other questions? Okay.
I'm just curious, for some of the important legislative work or legal work that's going on internationally in other countries, are the cases related to these issues as high profile as they are here in the U.S. and Canada and Europe, for example, or are they often subject to less press scrutiny or scrutiny from the public in general?
It depends on what countries. It really depends on the countries. In Europe, there are a variety of cases that become fairly high profile after they make it to the European Court of Human Rights. And also, depending on the issues, sometimes the media don't want to report on them. In Canada, there's a variety of things going on in Canada with parental rights, and also there was a case in Canada where the Supreme Court just ruled that a Christian university cannot require its students to sign a biblical code of living, i.e., no sexual relations outside of marriage between a man and a woman. So, we're not just talking same-sex marriage, we're talking any premarital sex, any extramarital affairs, any of that, right? Well, they were told that their students in their law school will not be allowed to sit for the bar exam in British Columbia unless the university does away with that requirement that their students, Christian students, sign a pledge that says that they will live a biblical life. Another case was a case of a father whose teenage daughter became transgender, and the court ordered him to use feminine pronouns or masculine pronouns for his daughter, and said that if he didn't, it would be considered family violence. And it's just like, what? So there are there are cases you can find out about them, but they're not as broad, and that's primarily Europe, Canada, the U.S. Once you get outside of those, I mean, unless there's a monetary interest, and you all remember what happened in Rwanda. You guys might not have even been born when the genocide in Rwanda happened. But it took a long time for the rest of the world to find out that it was even going on. Because most people were like, Rwanda, what's that? Who is she? Because no one cares about Rwanda because there's nothing going on. And even today, the similar things are happening in Nigeria with Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen killing Christians, and in other countries. And you rarely hear anything about it because Nigeria doesn't have, all you hear about Nigeria is that people are getting emails from Nigerians saying that they've inherited millions of dollars that you need to help them, spend, right? If you've gotten those phishing emails, you know what I'm talking about. But there are things that are going on in other countries that the media just never cover because, you may remember Bring Back Our Girls, and that was the Chibok girls in Nigeria, these 300 young girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. And God bless, people who were like hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, and Michelle Obama was tweeting hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, and about 2 days later, Kim Kardashian did something else, and everybody forgot about that, right? How often does that happen? Like with Twitter. What's trending now, and if it's not trending, it's Colin Kaepernick did something, or, the Patriots did something, or, something happens and all of a sudden important issues stop trending and people forget about them. So that's one of the challenges that we have, is raising the awareness of these issues. And that's what RFI does. That's what this IRF roundtable on Capitol Hill does with Ambassador Sam Brownback in that role now. I think he's the first ambassador in 20 years who really has taken this to the level that the law required. For the first 20 years, the International Religious Freedom Act, the IRFA Act, which is now known as the Frank Wolf Act, he's really, that law required, an ambassador at large who was pushing these issues. And it hasn't been until this administration and this ambassador that we've now ramped it up. And next week, not next week, but the following week, there will be the second ministerial to advance religious freedom here in DC. They're expecting over 1,000 civil society people and over 100 countries, representatives from 100 countries at this Religious Freedom Roundtable. So we're raising the awareness of these issues. And yet, as the statistics from Pew say, it's still 80% of the world's population have high or very high restrictions on their religious freedom. So it's important that we continue to raise awareness of these issues. And yeah, some of these cases, nobody will probably ever hear anything other than from us about this case in Nepal. And even if they win the case and the court says that law is unconstitutional and they have to get rid of it, it'll be a minor blip. More people are worried that and they should be, that climbers are dying on the hike up to Everest because there's too many of them. You hear that in the news, but you don't hear the fact that Christians are being arrested daily in Nepal, weekly in Nepal, simply under this new law. And so those are issues that we try to raise the awareness of, and hopefully you have opportunities, whatever you end up doing, to raise awareness of some of these issues, and raise the awareness with your family and your friends, because a lot of people just aren't aware of those issues.
I think just one more question. So if anyone else has any questions.
The school example you gave, that's my school.
Okay.
In BC, it's
Right.
pretty still kind of relevant there, but not many people out of the area know about it.
Right. And I know because my colleagues at the Christian Legal Fellowship in Canada have been fighting that case, for the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a challenge when we see these issues, come up and nobody else knows about them. If you haven't yet seen it, and I don't know if it's going to be on, amazing documentary, Emmanuel. Did any of you go and see that when it was on a couple of weeks ago? It's about the AME church in Charleston, South Carolina, where Dylan, that kid went in and shot those people during their Bible study. Unbelievably powerful story. But to me, the real story, and I think what blew people away, and they really captured it well in this documentary, was that at the court hearing, all these family members, one after another, got up and said, "You took away the life of my mother, my dog, but I forgive you." That's powerful. I mean, because lack of forgiveness doesn't hurt the person, it hurts you. So that's a movie I recommend. Find out when it's going to be showing again, and watch the Emmanuel documentary, because it's kind of talks about, it doesn't really talk about religious freedom, but it talks about the power of forgiveness, and it's something that we need more of. So.
Thank you, Brent, for sharing, making us more aware globally with conviction of the issues, and really the impact of an organization that is not a Beckett, it's not an ADF, it's a smaller organization in terms of number of people, but in terms of partnership internationally in 130 countries. It's amazing what you can do when you're driven by conviction and the desire to be compassionate. So I want to thank you for that.
Thanks.
Let me say that I appreciate these questions and this conversation. I was on the campus of Brigham Young University about 2 weeks ago in a conference, and I was on a panel dealing with higher education within the context of growing diversity and pluralism. And we were touching on that, getting around some of those tough issues in here. And one of the points I made on that panel was that we can't approach the subjects with soft dialogue. Will do us no good. And I said it's got to be gritty. We've got to be able to talk around the table about the tough issues. We bring to the table our freedom of conscience, and we bring to the table our exercise of our belief in religion. Those are principles that our framers wisely enshrined in the Constitution, and we all bring those. Doesn't matter if you're on the right or the left. We've got to somehow be devoid of the politics and have real dialogue. And it's only then that I think that we begin to understand our convictions, our freedom of conscience, and respect for one another. And so I like just a touch of that here, even emerging with our young people, because I think if there's anything we can learn from you, it's not to have soft dialogue. Because what changes culture is going to be real conversation. And Brent, you mentioned that politics, these kinds of things are downstream from culture. So you have to ask, well, what's upstream from culture? And nobody's talking about that a whole lot. But I think education, where you all are, education is actually the incubator of culture. And that's where you live. Culture comes out of the academy. And so you have a chance in your corner of the world right now, I think, to be part of that crucible through which culture is formed. The mores, the ideals, the morals that are found in culture really many times are formed through you in the academy. So we have a great opportunity as young leaders to do that. Thank you for raising our awareness of global issues. Let's pledge ourselves to engage, with a grittiness on those issues. Okay. Hey, let's hang around for some time here. You don't need to rush off. Have some soft drinks, and there's some goodies out here, and just enjoy a short reception with us. Let me mention, Brent mentioned the ministerial. Maybe Caroline did. So the ministerial will be thousands of civil servant leaders coming from all the countries of the world here to Washington, July 15th through the end of that week. There will be many, many, many side events, and you may not have been invited to participate in the official State Department meetings at the ministerial. There will be more side events that you can imagine, and by side events, I mean organizations like the RFI. I don't know if, are you partnering on any?
No, we're not. There's already been so many out there, we don't need to add to that. So.
Exactly. Well, the International Religious Freedom Roundtable will be sponsoring many. They have a calendar online, but we're hosting several here. There's a pamphlet as you leave. Pick that up. There'll be some conversations that will be going on you might be interested in. I know there'll be one about the American Charter, which was a 3-year attempt by the RFI, 3 years drafting a charter, a document around which people on the far right and far left could get together around the table and talk about religious freedom from principles that both sides could agree. That's tough, really tough. But one of the side events will be talking about that So take that pamphlet, see if it fits your schedule, come to some of those events. There'll be 200 others you can choose from.
Yeah, there's about 50. There's one that we're calling the second stage at the theater on GW campus. It's about a 10-minute walk from the State Department building, but they're going to live stream what's going on at State Department at the theater at GW campus. So if you're interested to come and hear, there are a number of diplomatic speakers. The Vice President is expected to speak, possibly even President Trump to show up and speak. The Secretary of State will be there, but they will also bring in various survivors of religious persecution who will come and share their stories from a variety of faiths, and the challenges and problems that they've gone through. I don't think they've yet released the final list, but it's an amazing opportunity, that has never happened until last year. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term kairos, the way last year was the 20th anniversary of the IRFA Act, which established the ambassador and that office, and on the 20th anniversary of the IRFA Act was this first ministerial to advance religious freedom. And you think, wow, that's pretty timely. Well, there's Chronos and there's Kairos. Chronos is, and my alarm is going off. Chronos is just, what time is it? This is the 20th anniversary. Kairos is a significant moment in time. And I think what happened last year, and with Ambassador Brownback coming into that role, that this ministerial is a Kairos moment, not just a Chronos moment. It's not just the 20th anniversary of IRFA, but it's truly a Kairos moment for religious freedom in this country and around the world. And you have an opportunity, that week of July 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th to go and escape your internships or wherever you are, if they'll let you, and try and go to some of these side events. Some of them are in the evenings. There are a number of documentaries that are going to be being shown, some on women's issues, one documentary on North Korea. There's a number of stuff that's going to be available. So do you have the link already to the
We do, to the full schedule.
Yeah, the full schedule. So
if you don't have it,
you can
email Caroline or myself.
They'll get that to you.
We
It's just a
can give you
link,
the
and it's a
link,
PDF. And on the PDF, there are links to every event. Whether you're required to RSVP, so they know that you want to come eat lunch, they have enough food for you, or some are invitation only. So sorry you can't go if you don't know the right people. And some of those I would like to go to. I'm sure I won't be invited, but take advantage of that while you're here in Washington D.C. This is an amazing opportunity to really witness what the world is doing for religious freedom. And
well, thank you for coming.